Hi there. Today, One Cancer Place introduces you to a poignant story of a person, one of a series of personal stories that provides a peek into the authentic life of a cancer patient or caregiver. We hope that you find the magic in these unique stories, because each of these lives is lived to the hilt, in service of others and in a deep gratitude for survival.
Hi, I'm Janet Hanson. I am a retired registered nurse, and I participate in One Cancer Place as part of the as part of, in general, the cancer community. I came to One Cancer Place through another cancer community that our founder, Erica Hanson Brown, was involved in, and just benefited from it tremendously. And so I believe in the efforts of direct patient and caregiver support by other patients and caregivers. I think it's a very magical thing. And of course, what One Cancer Place wants is the educated patient and caregiver, so that we can advocate for the best care possible for our loved ones.
And so just to get started, let's just start at the basics. Will you tell me about your son, Gavin?
So my son, Gavin, was an amazing young man, and I actually wish just about everybody could have met him. Was age 25 at diagnosis. He was in year 2 of a medical scientist training program at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. He was really doing his dream career pathway. He wanted to be a physician, and he wanted to be a researcher. So he was in year 2. That was, for him, second year of medical school. And in January, he came down with what turned out to be an obstruction of his GI tract from a cancer. And he was diagnosed on January the 13th, which happened to be a Friday the 13th of 2017. He was diagnosed with stage 4 inoperable appendix cancer, which is a bit of a rare cancer, but not by any means an uncommon cancer. And like many appendix cancer sufferers, his cancer was discovered late stage. It was widely dispersed throughout his abdomen. He had what was called peritoneal carcinomatosis, kind of a tough word. Yeah. And it just means that, like, this is how I sometimes describe it, that the cancer in his appendix burst open and kind of barfed out cancer cells all over his peritoneum. So we don't have great treatment methods for that. He was being treated at University Hospital in Cleveland, and they were a great team. And on the night of his surgery, they delivered to my husband and I the news that Gavin was considered inoperable, but that they would endeavor to treat him with a palliative treatment plan, and that they would try to give him quality of life so that he could achieve some of his goals. And he was, at that time, Case kind of pushed him forward from what was essentially, he was in his second year of medical school, and they pushed him forward into his PhD so that he could work more intensively with the guy that was going to be his chair of his dissertation committee, an amazing guy by the name of Dr. Jeff Collier. And Gavin did research, attended classes. He continued to take classes at Case and to do the things that people do in the medical scientist training program while doing chemo every other week. And he was able to publish some articles. He was able to do some science, and that was really an important goal for him. But obviously, his goals were blighted, and he died 20 months after diagnosis, almost 20 months after diagnosis of his appendix cancer on October the 4th, 2018. He was 26.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, because it's not ever something you expect, I think, for some somebody so young.
And so Gavin's dad and I are both in the healthcare field. My husband was a family physician, and I was a nurse, and I practiced all my career in some aspect of nursing, never oncology. But we both knew that really awful things can happen to people. We both knew that, and we knew that we were experiencing one of those awful things. But the real bright side was that we were fortunate enough to get a second opinion visit at MD Anderson, and they pretty much reiterated everything that the University Hospital doctors had told us. We tried to maybe access some second level science, but cancer is a very sneaky disease. It's a hider. And Gavin, because of his peritoneal carcinomatosis, he had cancer kind of like everywhere, diffusely through his abdomen, but he didn't have any good sites that we could biopsy and get a good profile of his cancer that might yield some targets for intervention with either targeted drugs or immunological therapies. And so we basically used the two main lines of treatment that are used for colon cancer, which are basically recycled in this case for appendix cancer. They're considered separate entities. And then, like I said, he benefited from a really talented team at University Hospital that did palliative procedures and kind of kept him going until the disease took his life.
It is amazing that in that period of time, he was able to accomplish so much. What do you feel like it meant for you to be able to see him achieve so many of these things?
So it was all bittersweet, because number one, I know it meant a great deal to Gavin that he could try to do science. And I know that Dr. Collier really strived to create Gavin's role so that he could continue to participate at the highest level possible. And it meant a tremendous amount to Gavin, but it was like the pinky fingertip of what he wanted to be able to participate, to do, to contribute to the science. I mean, he was hoping to be able to do a dissertation, to, finish medical school, to do a residency, and then he wanted to be a researcher in a lab. He wanted to have his own lab and have his own students and contribute to some body of knowledge. So it's all bittersweet, but at some point you have to be really grateful that your child was in your life and you were fortunate enough to know him and to watch him do things that were so important to him. And the other tricky part of our situation was that his dad and I lived in Kansas, and Gavin was obviously in Cleveland, Ohio. And so when things were going well, we tried to stay out of his way and let him have a life. Being independent was really important to him. And then we tried to be there when he needed us. And that, creating that balance. When I'm talking to other parents of young adults with a cancer, that's I kind of sometimes acknowledge that difficult dance of being there when they need you and staying out of the way when they're trying to live their lives.
Yeah, I imagine that would be really hard to find what would feel like the right balance. Was there a period where you moved to Cleveland?
So he was basically failing the second line of treatment in about late spring, maybe into summer of 2018. And so for me, I kind of felt like the handwriting was on the wall, and I did resign my job. And I told him that I would be there as much as he needed me to. And I basically visited in the summer, went back home for a very short amount of time, and came back in the summer of 2018. And I was in Cleveland until I brought him back home to Kansas in September of 2018. So that way we could all be together as a family.
I imagine that some people listening to this are caregivers themselves. How was that something that you navigated for yourself and made sure that you were supportive of your son, but then also taking time for yourself? Because I imagine it would be such an emotionally draining process.
It is. I I had some excellent, personally, I had some excellent support systems. And again, the University Hospital of Cleveland, their care team they were very attentive to me. And I felt like I had good relationships with them, and they listened to us and they helped us solve problems. I also, and this is going to sound really funny, but my husband and I, when we would go to Cleveland, we would stay in one particular Airbnb. And that couple became a support system to us. Gavin lived in a house with 3 other medical students / MD, PhD students. And they were a support system to us. And then just various people back home in Kansas too. But we were fortunate to have a lot of people around us. And they did, and they were, Gavin, it was really kind of magical watching Gavin's housemates and his good friends in Cleveland on how they checked in with him. They gathered around him. And I sensed that there was some relief that I was there. But they were very attentive to his needs. But it's just hard to watch somebody's health fail incrementally right before your very eyes when you knew them to be kind of a vital person. Gavin liked camping and hiking. He was an Eagle Scout, and he liked climbing 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. He enjoyed doing that. And so his friends knew him to be the person that was up for an adventure. And so to watch that change, was, I think it was probably hard on them. And they were all studying medicine, and they all knew that death was part of life. But it's a very different thing to watch it happen to appear.
No, absolutely. When you talk to people who are going through a similar experience, what is some of the advice that you have for them?
A lot of times, when you're talking with families who are experiencing this, or even couples who are experiencing it, and where it's a young family, and there's a dad and a mom, and a young dad or a young mom is actually the cancer patient, the problems are very similar, and it is, lining up who your care team is. And some families are real connected, and they've got it put together. But in what you might think of as the atomization that we experience in our society, some people are very alone, and they say, "Oh, I couldn't possibly ask my friends to help me. I couldn't possibly ask my in-laws to help me. I couldn't possibly ask anybody to help me." And what you do know is that as a caregiver, you got to have a team. You got to have a posse. And that's really hard. And so some people do try to, power through it and be alone. But I sometimes say, at least ask them, give them a chance to step up and do it. Because if you take care of somebody in a tender, fragile spot as this, it will change your life. And you will never regret it. Even though it might leave some marks on your heart, you will never regret doing it.
No, so well said. And yeah, I think what you're saying about if we don't ask, then we won't know.
And I to the opportunity to do it is just so important. The opportunity to be there for somebody. A lot of people are afraid of sick people, but it's a real gift to give yourself to be that person.
I know that you yourself are a nurse and your husband a physician, and so you obviously have experience in the medical field, but I'm wondering if there was any part of being a caregiver for your son. I guess, what did you learn through that process? What do you feel like it taught you?
Oh, I think it teaches you to advocate. And to this point, I still look back and think, well, maybe I should have been more of an advocate there. And so it teaches you about advocacy. I feel like the other thing that I really wanted for Gavin is I had my ideas about what I would do if I was in this situation, what I would say yes to and what I would say no to. But I reminded myself over and over that this this was his life. And there was a colon cancer advocacy organization that at one time they used a byline or a phrase of, live your best life. And this was my son's opportunity to live his best life. And so that's what I wanted for him is, live your best life. And there was a moment in Gavin's life when I knew that we were really coming close to end stage disease, and he was still receiving some treatment. And I do have some awareness that often hospice providers will say to you, we can do so much for you. And when you come to us and it's 72 hours of care that, you maybe didn't get as much of a benefit from us as you could have. And I appreciate that and I respect that. But I would talk to Gavin about that. And I would say, I want to do what you want to do. Here's a thought about this. What do you think? And he said, he goes, I want to keep trying this treatment. He was given a compassionate use medicine and he wanted to see if that was going to get him. And it had basically come into his hands a little too late in his course, but I understood that, so listening carefully, it's not about what you as the caregiver think is the best course of action. It's really listening deeply to what the patient wants. Sometimes you have to really be realistic about that. Like, for example, if Gavin had said to me, I think I want to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering now, I probably would have said, I just don't think you can tolerate that trip now. I probably would have had to been, but we really weren't having those kind of conversations. But you still have to, I still think listening to the patient is what has to happen. It's really important. It's their life.
I feel like that dynamic is complicated by the parent-child relationship.
It is tremendously. And he despised the fact that he was needing to be dependent, that he was needing our help, but he also knew he needed help, so it's very complicated. It's a very complicated time for them.
That is tough. You mentioned advocacy, and I know that this is something it sounds like you've taken on yourself. What are the things that you are passionate about seeing, in this space? What would you like to see changed?
So because I come from the provider side of that, I can't say I was an expert or knew how to maneuver it, but you kind of understand how healthcare systems, how they work. And so sometimes I would call somebody and say, this is what I'm thinking. And they would say, we can do that. Well, let's get it done. Or I would call the system and they would say, no can do, insurance, blah, 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 So one is that almost any kind of a patient with a complex illness, whether it's cancer or something else, they need somebody, unless they are really confident and really passionate about it, they need somebody to help them maneuver insurance systems, which are unbelievably hard to maneuver. And I'm actually, my job after my son died ended up being care management on a hospital unit. And so, and everything I learned there just told me, why are these systems so hard for patients to maneuver? And it's a refinement of cruelty in many cases. I think within the cancer community itself, I would like patients to understand the benefits of palliative care. Gavin's treatment team at University Hospital was passionate about offering him palliative care services throughout his treatment. And palliative care is separate, of course, from hospice. It can really improve quality of life for cancer patients. So it's a really, if you are in a cancer center that actually has palliative care services readily available for patients, which is not always true, then you are indeed fortunate. And you should not interpret your care team saying to you, we think palliative care could add something to your loved one's care situation. A lot of times people they hear that as, we're going to send you to hospice in a hot minute. We're giving up on you. They often hear it in that frame of mind. And I wish that more people understood palliative care as something that can not just, that can extend quality of life, which is probably at least as important as duration of life. And then this is kind of like a post-Gavin moment of advocacy. I am really interested in learning more about the landscape of early case finding with particularly, this cancer, appendix cancer. Although a lot of the features of appendix cancer, you could also say about ovarian cancer. You could say about pancreatic cancer. That by the time it's found, it's late stage. And so I've been recently reviewing a book that I enjoy a great deal that is called The First Cell and the Human Costs of Pursuing Cancer to the Last by Azra Raza, a very wise doctor and clinician. And she talks a lot about putting more effort into early case finding, and especially in the realm of colon cancer, which I came to know a lot about. We need new tools. We need new tools because relying on colonoscopy to do all of the early case finding in early onset colorectal cancer patients, it's not the right tool. We need some better tools. And I would say that research is happening, but it's probably a little bit underfunded. And so that's an advocacy, because it's not just important to do case finding. It's important to do case finding at a point when you have a hope to intervene before they have the amount of suffering and the big burden of disease that Gavin already had. And that's, like I said, true for other cancers, like I've mentioned.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you feel like is important to say here?
I guess I have a little bit of compassion for oncologists and for healthcare providers in general in this environment. And I would like to see a more compassionate model of care that actually gave oncologists more time to be with their patients. And that would be good for patients too. And that's another thing that I would like to see, because the profit is king model of healthcare has been arguably really hard on patients, but it's also really hard on providers. And so, I know that I have that global view because I've spent some time in the provider's shoes, but I would believe that if healthcare weren't quite so profit driven, if it were more care centered, and it is really clear that in the health policy setting, the things that are sometimes done in the name of whatever efficiency, saving money, allocating resources are really, they get turned into really promoting profitability. And too often profitability for sometimes insurance companies, sometimes for hospitals, but not as good for the providers, not as good for the docs, the nurses, and definitely not for the patients.
One Cancer Place, the newest patient-like community, leads the way in delivering the revolution in cancer care to its growing membership of cancer stakeholders and patients. Find and connect with us online at onecancerplace.org.